If you've never watched a family funeral turn into a shareholder meeting, count your blessings. The ballroom AC was set to meat locker, the coffee was hotel brown and mean, and the lawyer's binder had more tabs than a fighter cockpit. My name is Ava Whitfield, United States Air Force. 3 days after my father died, my sister ran this room like she just rung the opening bell. Leona didn't look at me when I walked in. She never does. She clocked the uniform, the ribbons, the boots polished to inspection gloss, then slid her gaze back to the attorney as if my name were a typo she'd already corrected. The carpet swallowed footsteps. A chandelier hummed. Somewhere a spoon tinked the side of a cup and died of embarrassment. "Let's proceed," Leona said, crisp as a signature line. The lawyer gray suit, careful vowels, read the wool like a quarterly statement. Trusts folded into other trusts, assets migrating like geese to warmer banks. When he reached my name, he hesitated the way people do before giving bad news to a stranger. To Captain Ava Whitfield, he read, a sealed envelope and my profound respect for her service. That was it. No house on Vineyard Lane, no stake in the holdings, not even his wristwatch with the hairline crack at the 9. The envelope was thin enough to feel useless between two fingers. I slid a thumb under the flap. Inside, my father's old challenge coin, scuffed brass, eagle worn smooth, and a 1979 photograph of him grinning beside an F4, sun in his eyes, future bigger than he knew. Leona crossed her legs. It's what Dad wanted. I held the coin. It had the weight of something that had seen more gravity than men like the lawyer would ever know. What Dad wanted, I said evenly, was rarely what you wanted. Don't be dramatic, Ava. She offered the room a professional smile that never got past her teeth. We're consolidating, it's responsible. The attorney cleared his throat. There was an amendment last year, a mental health clause, standard language to ensure fiduciary continuity. I looked up. A what clause? Leona watched me the way a cat watches a glass on a table. It's simple, beneficiaries must be stable. Your file flagged an evaluation after your egress incident. She said it lightly, like she was commenting on the weather. Nothing personal, nothing personal. The words landed like a spent shell on tile. I slid the photo back into the envelope and pocketed the coin, the brass cold against my palm. Who provided my records? Public safety matters, she said, tilting her head. Families protect themselves. By family, she meant Leona. By protect, she meant remove obstacles. The lawyer shuffled papers. People rose, shook hands, murmured condolences that smelled like cologne and fear of headlines. I stood still and let the room flow around me. In the reflection of a dark window, I saw my own face. Calm, a little tired, eyes that had watched dawn crawl across runways and not blinked. Leona finally turned to me at the doorway, voice soft enough to pass for kindness if you didn't know better. I booked our flight, she said. Optics, we should arrive together. You booked my optics, I said. She smiled. You're welcome. The airport air tasted like recycled citrus and duty-free perfume. Leona glided through security on status alone. I stepped through on muscle memory, shoes off, laptop out, belt in the tray, because rules don't bend for uniforms, they stiffen. At the gate she said window, as if calling dibs on childhood. I took the aisle, between us one empty seat like a ceasefire neither of us signed. Dad always hoped you'd grow out of this, she said after takeoff, fingering the stem of a plastic flute. The soldier phase. I scrolled past movies without seeing any. You say that like service is a haircut. Some people enlist to escape, she said. Others enlist to avoid growing up. She touched her tablet and a subject line flashed red before she turned the screen just enough for me to see valence, trust, final confirmation. I didn't bite. When predators circle, you don't bleed for them. She tried again, softer. You do understand you're not in the wool anymore. I let the aircraft's hum answer for me. Turbulence brushed the fuselage, nothing more than a handshake from the sky and leveled. The seatbelt sign chimed. Someone laughed 2 rows back. Somewhere a baby tested its range and gave up. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from a squad mate. You good, Whitfield? I typed peaky and didn't hit send. Leona adjusted her cuff. Look, I don't expect you to like it, but responsibility is heavy. Not everyone is built for it. I turned and met her eyes. I'd seen engines ingest birds and keep turning. I'd seen men lose blood and keep marching. But I had never seen anything like Leona's certainty, the kind that doesn't know the ground is getting closer. Responsibility, I said, is flying through whether you didn't order and not blaming the sky. She blinked, a glitch in perfect software, then smiled. Adorable. Outside, the Atlantic lay black and patient. The cabin lights dimmed to a tired glow. I reached into my pocket and pressed the coin into my palm until the eagle's memory imprinted my skin. My father had carried it through years that tried to break him. He'd given it to me now for a reason. A gentle shiver ran through the airframe. Nothing, a whisper. Still, the pilot in me took notes. Slight pitch burble, compensatory throttle, a tone in the engine like a throat being cleared. Leona didn't notice. She was busy pretending the flight attendant knew her personally. I closed my eyes and cataloged the room, the rattle of ice in a paper cup, the hush of static over the speaker, the soft turn of paper as the woman across the aisle did a crossword in pencil. The physics of a life can change on sounds like these. You learn to hear it coming. Anyway, Leona said, half to herself, tomorrow we sign, clean, elegant. She looked at me as if offering a peace token. You'll be happier, honestly. Freedom suits you. Freedom, I said, has a cost. She lifted a brow. And you're very brave about costs. Heroic. Even, but business is math. She tapped her tablet once, twice. Somewhere in that thin glass was the version of our family she could manage and monetize. Somewhere in my pocket was the version my father remembered. I didn't argue. I never win in her language, none of us do. Instead, I watched the reflection in the window. My face and the dark ocean layered together until I couldn't tell where one ended. The captain's voice came on, smooth, confident, mentioning a weather line up ahead. Seatbelts, please, routine. Leona sighed theatrically. First class should buy better air. I smiled without humor. Air doesn't care what you paid. She didn't get it, she never has. The seatbelt sign chimed again. The coin grew warmer in my hand as if answering a question I hadn't asked aloud. Maybe my father knew exactly what he was doing, leaving me something you can't deposit. Maybe he knew there would be a moment when everything he taught me would be the only thing that mattered. The lights flickered once like a wink and steadied. Leona lifted her glass. To op. The pop from the starboard side faded into the cabin's background hum, swallowed by chatter and clinking glasses. No one reacted. No one but me. My eyes stayed fixed on the overhead panel, waiting for the seatbelt light to flicker again, for a chime, for anything. Nothing came. Just the long, even drone of an aircraft pretending everything was fine. Leona swirled the last of her Chardonnay and set it down like she owned the tray table. See, turbulence, she said, reading my face. You military types jump at every shadow. I didn't answer. I'd learned long ago that silence unnerves her more than words ever could. Between us, the empty seat felt like a trench line, neutral ground no one dared cross. She leaned into it anyway. Dad really wanted us to work together, she said, her voice taking on the practiced warmth of a sales pitch. I think he hoped you'd eventually grow out of this soldier phase and come home. Home, I repeated as if the word meant the same thing to both of us. Yes, she said brightly. Not some base overseas, not hiding in a cockpit, real life. I scrolled through the in-flight entertainment menu, every title a shield I didn't plan to watch. Didn't know living abroad and flying aircraft was a character defect. Her laugh was soft and razor-thin. Some people use the military to escape Ava, others to avoid responsibility. You picked both. There it was. She turned coward into compliment, insult into analysis. Classic Leona. I shifted in my seat and let the coin in my pocket dig into my thigh and anchor against her storm. The first round of drinks arrived. She called the flight attendant by her first name, Kara, like they were old sorority sisters. The woman didn't correct her, but the polite smile looked practiced. I caught the quick flick of relief when she turned to my aisle. Water's fine, I said. Leona raised her glass. To new beginnings. I tapped my plastic cup against it, not for the toast but for the sound, brittle, hollow, destined to crack. She leaned closer. You do realize you're not in the will anymore, right? I froze, not visibly. Years of flight deck discipline won't allow that, but enough for her to see the flicker in my eyes. She smiled, slow, savoring it. The mental health clause, she said, disqualifies beneficiaries with unresolved psychological records. I stared at her, my throat dry. What are you talking about? She sighed like a patient professor explaining basics to a failing student. Remember your evaluation after Syria? The concussion, the 3 months of mandatory leave. Not personal, Ava, just legal. That was the moment I knew she hadn't just stumbled on my weakest file. She dug for it, mined it, sharpened it into a weapon. You leaked my evaluation, I asked quietly. I shared it with the estate attorney, she corrected. To protect the family's interests. You're still family, of course. Of course, that phrase has killed more soldiers than bullets. The cabin tilted slightly as we banked west, chasing the edge of the Atlantic. A child laughed in the back, oblivious. I pressed the coin flat against my palm until it hurt. My father's face in that photo, the fighter jet behind him, burned in my mind. Maybe he knew this was coming. Maybe that's why he left me steel instead of paper. I looked at Leona. Really looked. The designer blouse, the perfect hair, the smug curve of someone who thought she'd already won the war. And maybe she had on paper, but wars aren't fought on paper. This flight, I thought, isn't just a trip home. It's the last stage of a silent battle I didn't know I was in. Outside, the sun slipped behind a sheet of clouds that looked like bruised cotton. The plane shuddered once, then settled. No one noticed. I did. Leona tilted her tablet so the bold red subject line faced me without actually handing it over. Final confirmation received. Assets transferred. She sipped her wine, eyes locked on mine. It's done, she said. I turned toward the window. The glass showed nothing but sky and reflection, her smirk over my shoulder, my jaw clenched. I wasn't angry anymore. I was calculating. There's a difference. The coin burned hot in my hand as the seatbelt light dinged again. A warning, a whisper. The vibration was subtle, like the murmur of a crowd you can't quite hear. It rolled up through the floorboards, a whisper in the metal. I knew that song, not turbulence, not weather, something mechanical adjusting where it shouldn't. Leona dabbed at her lipstick with a linen napkin. Really, Ava, you look like you're preparing for combat. It's just air pockets. Try to relax for once in your life. I didn't bother correcting her. Explaining systems to Leona was like explaining poetry to a brick wall. She preferred to be the only one speaking. Between us, the empty seat stayed as stiff as a referee no one respected. I kept my elbow on the armrest, body angled toward the aisle, eyes scanning. Flight attendants moved quickly, too quickly, securing carts, stowing glasses. They spoke in calm tones, but their pace betrayed them. The sky was shifting, and they knew it. I've spent enough hours strapped into cockpits to feel changes before they announce themselves. The pitch of the engines dipped, then rose, compensating. A ripple of unease spread through the passengers, whispers shifting in seats, someone fumbling with an overhead bin. Leona leaned closer. You really shouldn't stare like that. People will think you're nervous. I turned my head slowly, met her eyes. People should buckle their belts. Almost on cue, the seatbelt sign chimed. A low murmur swept the cabin as belts clicked into place. I cinched mine tighter, one practice tug. The captain's voice came over the intercom, smooth as silk, the kind of voice airlines train for exactly this moment. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a bit of chop as we pass through a weather front. Nothing to be concerned about. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We appreciate your cooperation. His words were calm, too calm. My gut said otherwise. Leona scoffed. They all read from the same script. Honestly, how do people still fall for it? She raised her glass again. The Chardonnay rippled, caught the overhead lights like liquid gold. Then the aircraft jolted hard enough to splash half her drink into her lap. Her gasp was theatrical, followed by a sharp press of the call button. Unacceptable, she muttered, blotting her blouse. I barely moved. Years of flying had taught me to ride turbulence like a wave, keep shoulders loose, eyes ahead. Fear tightens you. Fear breaks you. The attendant rushed over, napkins in hand, voice calm but eyes darting. Ma'am, we're hitting a rough patch. Can I get you a towel? Leona waved dismissively. Whatever, and maybe ask the pilots for less bouncing next time. I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. If arrogance could fly, Leona wouldn't need wings. The cabin lights dimmed. Outside, the sun slid behind bruised clouds, turning the horizon into a smear of gray and copper. I adjusted the edge of my jacket, tugging it straight, ritual more than need. Leona wasn't done. Of course not. You know, she said, scrolling on her tablet, Dad always expected me to run things. The law degree, the firm, the contacts, you were his decoration, the uniform at family dinners, something to trot out for photo ops. Her words landed the way they always did, sharp, smug, dipped in sugar. Once upon a time they would have cut deep, not anymore. Funny thing about decorations, I said, eyes still on the window. Sometimes they hold the fabric together. She rolled her eyes. Spare me the metaphors, the trust is mine, the estate is mine, you've got your coin, we should both learn to live with it. I finally turned, leaned back into my seat, let my voice drop low. You're wrong about one thing, Leona. She tilted her head, waiting for the punchline. This flight isn't about optics, it isn't about trust funds, it's about survival. And when survival's on the line, all your contacts and contracts won't mean a damn thing. Her smirk faltered for just a heartbeat, then she laughed, brittle and forced. Always so dramatic, Ava. Another jolt rocked the cabin. This one sharper, harder, overhead bins rattled. A child cried out, silenced quickly by a mother's hand. The hum of conversation turned into anxious whispers. The attendants strapped themselves into jump seats now. That wasn't standard chop. That was procedure. Leona's fingers tightened around the stem of her empty glass. This is ridiculous. Why aren't they saying anything? Because I thought they don't know yet, or worse, they do. I looked at the aisle, the ceiling panels, the tiny shifts in vibration under my feet. I'd flown enough combat sorties to feel when a bird was wounded, and this aircraft wasn't flying clean. My father's coin pressed hot into my palm, almost like a pulse. A message, a reminder. I didn't say it aloud. The smell arrived in a thin blade, burnt plastic with a chemical bite. Not peanuts, not reheated wiring from a coffee maker, hot, synthetic, wrong. It slid down the aisle like bad news. Leona sniffed, offended. Who sprayed something? She said it the way rich people say taxes. It's not perfume, I said. Flight attendants moved like chess pieces, fast, quiet, purposeful. One unlatched the galley breaker and checked a panel. Another did the half-smile / half-whisper to an older couple while her eyes skipped to the ceiling. A third strapped into the jump seat near door 2, lips pressed flat. None of them looked scared, they looked busy, which is worse. A low shiver ran the length of the fuselage, more vibration than motion. Engine tone dipped, then compensated. My fingers found the coin in my pocket and held, brass warming to skin. I wasn't praying, I was calibrating. Is anyone going to say something? Leona asked, sharper now. The attendant nearest us crouched, braced against a seat back. We're working with the flight deck, ma'am, she said. Please keep your belt fastened. Leona gave the attendant a look like she'd asked her to mop. I'm in business class, and I'm asking you to help me help you, the attendant said, not unkind, and moved on. The intercom clicked, a half beat of static. Then the first officer's voice, calm, trained, but thinner than the script calls for. Ladies and gentlemen, we're addressing a minor technical issue on the right side. We'll update you shortly. Please remain seated with seatbelts fastened. Minor, the word they use when they need 10 more seconds. Leona rolled her eyes. They all go to the same school for euphemisms. Another jolt, sharper. The overhead bin above 12C snapped an inch, then settled. A baby started wailing. Somewhere a glass hit carpet and didn't break. I forced air into my lungs and let it out slow, counting 4 in, 4 hold, 6 out. It's not meditation. It's hydraulics for the nervous system. Across the aisle, a guy in a Nuggets hoodie had both hands locked white on the armrests. His teenage daughter tried to look brave and failed. I caught her eye and gave a small nod that said, buckle, breathe, I see you. She nodded back, tiny, grateful. The cabin lights dimmed again, 2 shades darker than atmospheric. Outside, the sky went from bruise to iron. The aircraft shivered, then steadied. The smell didn't leave, it fattened. Leona leaned toward me, voice pitched low for insult. Budget carriers hire ex-military who think combat hours translate to passenger safety. It's theater. I turned my head. I'm one of those ex-military. Yes, she said with a smile that wasn't, and I love that for you. Something banged aft, metal on metal, hollow, not catastrophic, but not social either. The cabin took a collective breath. The attendant near us unclipped, stood, reclipped, her hands moving faster now. Chop, Leona said, like labeling it made it smaller. Wiring, I said. She laughed, paranoid. I didn't argue. The thing about arguing with gravity is that gravity always wins the debate. Better to prepare the landing. The intercom cracked again. Cabin crew, please take your seats. No thank you, no warm timbre, command voice. Belts clicked, carts vanished. One attendant jogged up the aisle, knelt by a man trying to stand. Sir, I need you seated. He sank back blinking as if his legs had committed treason. Another shift in the airframe, this one with a yaw twist. My shoulder pressed the armrest, left to right, a quarter-inch slide you only feel if you've slept with engines in your ears. I didn't like it. We weren't riding the weather anymore. We were negotiating with it. Leona went on because Leona always goes on. You're unusually quiet, planning a dramatic monologue about courage. Planning, I said, to stay alive. She smirked. Cowardice dressed as stoicism, classic military branding. A soft chime overhead, then silence. The cabin noise thinned as if the aircraft itself was holding breath. The smell sharpened. My tongue tasted batteries. The first pop was small, like a knuckle crack. The second was not. It thudded through the starboard side with enough force to bounce silverware. Gasps, a curse, someone's muffled prayer. The lights flickered long enough for faces to become negatives and back again. Leona had her call button mashed before the power stabilized. Finally, she said, meeting the attendant's eyes with that executive frost. Tell the pilots this is unacceptable. The attendant's smile died. Professionalism stayed. Ma'am, we need you calm and seated. Leona opened her mouth for another round. I put a hand out, palm down. Enough. No heat, no argument. Just the word with weight. She shut it, shock flashing across her face like a camera. She wasn't used to me saying it like I meant it. The cabin edged into a new sound, not the clean drone of cruise, not the thrash of turbulence, an uneven whine with a high note like metal asking a question. I unlatched my belt one notch, not to stand, never stand during unknowns, but to make sure I could move when it mattered. A man too rose forward, twisted in his seat. Is that normal? He asked no one and everyone. No, I said before I could stop myself. The first officer came back on. The cheer was gone from his tone. Ladies and gentlemen, we're working an engine issue on the right side. We have control. Please remain seated. Cabin crew standby. We have control. Good phrase, said for them as much as for us. Leona's knuckles were pale now, her rings biting into skin. She swallowed and tried for snide, but it came out thin. If they were competent, we wouldn't be. The oxygen masks didn't drop. Not yet. But I felt the cabin pressure wobble as the system bled to compensate. My ears clicked. The coin in my palm was a sun. I looked at the curtain that hid the forward galley and the reinforced door beyond it. I pictured the cockpit, checklists spitting from a thermal printer, buttons lit like a fever dream, a captain doing math with God. The plane gave one long, unhappy shudder. The aisle rippled with it. The teenagers gripped hands. The attendant across from me lifted her eyes to mine for a microsecond, an unguarded flash that said, if you know something, be ready. Leona saw the look pass and latched onto it. Don't, she whispered. Do not even think about getting involved. You don't fly this. You don't belong up there. I turned back to her and saw finally what was behind the teeth and the titles. Fear, pure, personal, unshareable, for herself, not for us. It steadied me. Belonging, I said, is decided by what you do when it's your turn. The intercom clicked again, then coughed, then died. For a heartbeat, we were just a metal tube in air, full of human breath and the smell of hot wire. I slid my thumb along the edge of the coin and felt the old eagle's beak. My father's voice, memory thin, not set. The bang didn't echo, it stuck. A metallic punch followed by the kind of silence that makes everyone realize they've been living on borrowed calm. The cabin tilted, then steadied, but not before the overhead bins rattled open. A backpack spilled, a plastic toy skidded under my seat, and somewhere behind us a glass shattered against metal. Then the word came, crisp but cracked through static. Mayday, mayday. 3 syllables that rearranged the air. The lights dimmed again. Emergency strips glowing along the aisle in pale green. People began whispering too loudly, some praying, some gasping, some clutching strangers' hands like they'd rehearsed this moment all their lives. Leona clutched her armrest with both hands. Her lips parted to say something snide, but what came out was closer to a child's mutter. This isn't supposed to happen. No, it isn't, but it does. The coin in my pocket burned like a fuse. My father's coin. My father's silence. His last words to me hadn't been, I love you or I'm proud. They'd been nothing at all, just a coin slipped into an envelope with a note, discipline. Maybe this was what he meant. I unbuckled one click, not to stand yet standing in chaos is suicide, but to give myself margin. My fingers flexed against my knees. I listened. The right engine coughed, a mechanical stutter that made the fuselage tremble. I'd heard similar sounds in the desert when birds hit turbines or rounds found metal. But this wasn't combat. This was 300 civilians trapped in an aluminum tube 30,000 feet over an ocean. The first officer's voice returned, thinner, edges frayed. Ladies and gentlemen, we're working an engine fire indication. Cabin crew, stand by for further instruction. Fire indication. That wasn't just euphemism. That was checklist language. The flight attendants moved fast, strapping in, grabbing emergency manuals. One of them near us yanked a panel open and checked the circuit breakers. The passengers watched with wide eyes, searching for comfort in movements that looked anything but casual. Leona turned to me, face pale but still hunting for control. Ava, you can't, don't even think about it, you're not rated for this. She was right, I wasn't, not on paper, but paper doesn't fly planes. Another jolt rocked us, harder this time, and oxygen masks spilled from the ceiling like yellow fruit on rubber vines. Gasps rippled through the cabin. A toddler wailed, her mother fumbling the mask over her tiny face. The man in the Nuggets hoodie yanked his down with shaking hands, pressed it to his daughter's mouth first, then his own. Good instincts. The attendants shouted, "Put your own mask on before assisting others." Their voices practiced but cracking at the edges. I yanked mine free, slipped the straps, pressed it tight. Cool oxygen rushed in, tinged with chemical, not fresh but real. My ears popped with the pressure change. Leona just stared at hers dangling, frozen. I can't. I snapped hers over her mouth, tugged the elastic. Breathe. Her eyes widened, then she inhaled. Oxygen steadied her panic into anger. She tore the mask off her face. You don't get to touch me. The plane dropped half a dozen feet in a single lurch. Her words strangled into a scream. Something inside me shifted then. The line between passenger and pilot blurred. I wasn't going to sit here and hope someone else's checklist saved us. I unbuckled, stood, the aisle tilted beneath me, bodies flinching as if I'd triggered something. A flight attendant spotted me instantly, eyes wide. She half raised a hand to stop me, then froze when she saw the insignia on my uniform. The ribbons, the calm on my face. Please, she whispered, barely audible over the hum. Help, that was all the clearance I needed. I braced against seats, moved forward through the narrow aisle, masks dangling, passengers staring. Some looked at me with relief, others with fear, one or two with suspicion, didn't matter. The curtain parted and the reinforced cockpit door loomed. My hand hit the handle, locked of course. I knocked once, twice firm. Inside chaos, warning horns, voices, then silence. The door clicked, unlocked. I pulled it open. The cockpit was a battlefield made of lights and alarms. Red indicators blinked across the panels like enemy fire. The captain was slumped forward, mask half attached, eyes glassy. The first officer fought the yoke with one hand and clutched his throat with the other. His skin was pale, sweat dripping down his temple. I can't, he choked out. I stepped forward, pulled my mask tighter, and dropped into the right side jump seat without waiting. The yoke felt sluggish, resisting like a stubborn animal. I shoved forward, then eased back. Finding its rhythm, status, I barked, the co-pilot coughed. Engine 2 fire, hydraulics failing, he pointed at the checklist printer, pages spilling out like white confetti, words sharp and coded, HID bypass, alternate trim, manual gear. I knew them, different bird, same language. Stand back, I said. He hesitated, then he let go. The captain twitched, tried to lift his head. I tapped his shoulder. Stay with me, sir. His lips moved, but no sound came. He was down for now. The first officer slid sideways, clutching the wall, eyes wide. He looked at me like a man drowning sees a lifeboat. You're the one from the cabin. Captain Ava Whitfield, United States Air Force, I said, steady as stone. 1,500 flight hours, multi-engine certified, I've got it. He exhaled a single, shuddering breath, relief. I wrapped my fingers around the yoke, heavy, stubborn, fire. The cockpit screamed. Warning horns wailed in staggered tones. Red lights pulsed across the panels like angry stars. The air felt thick, sharp, with the stench of ozone and something acrid, burning insulation, maybe worse. The right yoke trembled against my grip, heavy and sluggish, like wrestling a dying bull. My headset picked up nothing but static and the faint gasp of a frequency half broken. I toggled the calm voice, cutting hard and low. Madrid Center. This is Skybridge 3072. Mayday, Engine 2 fire. Captain incapacitated. Request vectors to nearest diversion field. Static hiss, then a crackle. Skybridge 3072 Madrid copies. Nearest available Roses airstrip 150 miles southwest. Short field, repeat, short field. Not ideal, not even close, but it was a runway. I eased the yoke left, fighting the bird back to level. We'll make it fit. Beside me, the co-pilot Stokes, I caught from his name tag, was pale, sweat streaking his temple. His hands hovered over switches, trembling but moving. He looked at me like I was either his salvation or his last mistake. You military, he croaked. Captain Ava Whitfield, U.S. Air Force, I said. Multi-engine, combat certified, I've got controls. He exhaled, something between relief and disbelief. God help us. No, I muttered, we help ourselves. The plane jolted hard like a fist to the belly. Alarms barked new codes. Hid fail. Fire Eng 2. The right engine's readout bled red across the panel. Pull the fire handle, I snapped. Stokes yanked it. The engine's howl dulled, then cut to a sickening silence. A column of smoke streamed past the starboard window, vanishing into night. Engine 2's gone, he said, voice cracking. Then we fly it on one, I said. My mind ticked checklists faster than the printer spat them out. Fuel crossfeed, alternate trim, manual hydraulics. I flipped the selectors, each movement muscle memory burned from years in simulators and war zones. The yoke stiffened, heavy but responsive. The nose dipped, altitude rolled. I pressed forward, then eased back, finding the bird's wounded balance. Altitude, I barked. 28,000 falling, Stokes said. Speed, 240. Too hot. I trimmed down, cutting thrust on the surviving engine to bleed speed without losing control. The plane wobbled, resisted, then steadied into a fragile glide. Behind us, the cabin was chaos, muffled by a closed door. Through the crackle of the PA, faint voices bled, crying, shouting, the clipped tones of flight attendants forcing calm where none existed. A shadow moved in the doorway. I didn't need to turn to know. Leona. She gripped the frame with manicured fingers, face pale, eyes wide. What are you doing? She demanded. I didn't take my eyes off the horizon. Flying the plane. You can't, you're not even, not now. Leona, I snapped. Sit down. Her mouth opened, closed. For once she obeyed. Madrid Center's voice cut through static. Skybridge 3072 Roses Field confirmed. 6,000-foot strip, wind 7 knots north, emergency crews standing by. 6,000 feet, too short for a wounded 777 with heavy fuel. But short didn't mean impossible, it just meant unforgiving. Stokes glanced at me, fear plain. We won't stop in time. We will, I said. You sound sure. I grinned without humor. That's the job. The cabin interphone chimed. A flight attendant's voice cracked. Cockpit, passengers are panicking. We need reassurance. I toggled the PA, steady voice masking the chaos inside me. This is Captain Whitfield. We have experienced an engine failure. We are diverting to Rose's airstrip for landing. Remain seated, remain calm, and follow crew instructions. We are in control. Silence answered, not disbelief, relief. Sometimes words don't need applause, they just need to exist. I killed the autopilot. It wasn't worth the fight. This bird needed human hands, not algorithms. The yoke shook under me. I held steady. Distance? I asked. 37 miles, Stokes said. Altitude 14,000. Good, bleed speed, line up. I adjusted heading. Dropped into a controlled descent. The altimeter ticked like a countdown clock. My breath matched it, slow, even metronome steady. The runway came into view at last, a strip of gray carved into black forest, narrow, short, the kind of place no one wants to see unless the alternative is worse. Gear down, I ordered. Stokes hit the switch. The landing gear groaned, hesitated, then locked with a bone-deep thunk. Locked, he confirmed. Flaps full. The plane shuddered, lift bleeding, drag blooming. Perfect. Altitude 5,000, speed 190, too fast. Cut thrust, I said. We'll stall, Stokes warned. We'll glide. The last engine idled. Silence pressed close, broken only by the wind shear rattling the fuselage. Brace call, I ordered. Stokes toggled the PA voice steady now. Brace, brace, heads down, stay down. Behind us, a ripple of motion as 300 people folded into the crash position, clutching hands, whispering prayers. The runway rushed up, trees loomed. I eased the nose, flaring just above stall, holding the angle like balancing on glass. The tires hit slam. The bird bucked. Tail struck but held, screech of rubber, smoke billowing. I yanked reverse thrust on the dead engine for drag, stomped brakes hard. The plane screamed in protest, slowing, runway eating itself under our wheels. Trees rushed closer, green turning to black. 60 knots, Stokes shouted. Hold it, I barked. The brakes shuddered, the nose dipped, the world narrowed to concrete and tree line. Then silence, a lurch, a stop. We sat 30 feet short of the trees. For one heartbeat, no one breathed. Then the cabin erupted. Sobs, cheers, gasps. A man shouted, "We're alive." The sound rolled forward like thunder. I peeled my hands off the yoke. My palms left sweat prints on the worn leather. Stokes laughed once, sharp and broken. "You actually did it." I looked out the windshield at the emergency trucks racing toward us, lights blazing. "No," I said. The first sound after silence was a seatbelt clicking open too fast. Then another. Then too many. Panic skittered along the aisle until the crew's voices cut through, trained, clipped, saving people from their worst instincts. I stayed in the right seat 3 breaths longer than necessary, watching fire rigs fan out around the nose. Rotating beacons painted the cockpit in red washes, then blue, then white. Stokes had both hands in his hair, laughing like a man who'd found the floor after free fall. "You ever consider flying commercial?" he asked, voice shaky. "Not dramatic enough," I said, and my hands realized they were still clenched. I peeled them off the yoke slow, leaving damp prints like proof I'd been there. The door cracked. A flight attendant leaned in, tears standing but held back by duty. "Is it over?" "Landing's done," I said. "Rescue's yours." She nodded, swallowed hard, and vanished. We did the dance. Fuel cut off, batteries where they belonged, checklists set to post-incident. The captain stirred, confused, color coming back. Stokes touched his shoulder like you touch a friend who's just woken from a bad dream. I slid out of the jump seat because there's a moment to lead and a moment to get out of the way. When I stepped into the cabin, time hit like weather, faces, masks dangling at throats, cheeks streaked with tears, people grabbing at gratitude and failing to find words big enough. The man in the Nuggets hoodie caught my eye and just nodded, jaw trembling. His daughter's hands shook around a ruined travel pillow. She mouthed, "Thank you." I gave them a pilot's 2-finger tap and kept moving. Leona stood in 14A as if the floor owed her stillness. Jacket immaculate. Expression evacuated. For a second, her mouth tried to form the word "you." Then it chose nothing. She adjusted a cuff like we'd taxied in late, and that was the only crime. The slides unfurled. Cold Newfoundland air rushed in with the smell of smoke and wet trees. People went, slow at first, then in clumsy little waves. On the tarmac, a paramedic threw a foil blanket over my shoulders. I didn't need it, but I took it the way soldiers take water they're not thirsty for, because someone's job is to hand it to you. The camera vans were faster than the paperwork. Lenses pivoted, finding uniforms like magnets find nails. "Ma'am, Captain, are you the pilot? Name, hero, hijack." I gave them all the same answer, a face that refused to star in whatever story they'd already written. They staged us in a hangar that smelled like oil and old rain. Folding chairs, bottled water, the hum of fluorescent lights pretending to be daylight. Nurses checked pupils and blood pressure. Airline reps checked liability. A kid in a NASA shirt tugged my sleeve. "Are you a real pilot?" "The realest kind," I said. He grinned like he'd just been promoted to astronaut. An airline man in a navy blazer found me. His tie knot was perfect and his smile wasn't. "Captain Whitfield, is it? We're grateful, of course. There's just protocol, statements, chains of authority." "There's also 300 people walking," I said. He held the smile like a weight. "Yes, well, if we can just keep details contained until our communications team." "Do your job," I said. "I did mine." He blinked as if I'd spoken weather. They took statements the way bureaucracies always do. Too many pens, not enough listening. "When did you enter the cockpit? Were you instructed to assume control?" Do you hold a type rating for this airframe? Any history of stress reactions under operational pressure? The FAA box was checked. The NTSB box was checked. Someone said TSA because someone always says TSA. I kept my voice flat and my sentences complete. I entered when the first officer could no longer safely manage solo. I assumed control under emergency authority. No, I'm not commercially typed. Yes, I am a multi-engine combat pilot with 1,500 hours. No, I did not experience hallucinations, flashbacks, or intrusive thoughts. I did not add. What I experienced was the smell of wire and a cabin full of strangers who wanted to live. If there were thanks, they happened in hallways, whispered and embarrassed. In the bigger rooms, gratitude gets redlined by legal. Leona sat with corporate like she'd been hired between the slide deployment and the bus ride. She didn't look at me while they talked optics and narrative risk. When someone mentioned a cabin recording that had already gone online, her voice calling me a toy soldier, her jaw twitched once. The PR woman said, "We'll contextualize. That's an industry term for wrap it in words until it changes shape." Night rolled in as fatigue did. They bussed us to a hotel with carpet that tried too hard and hallways that smelled like lemon solvent. I stared at the ceiling while my phone pulsed on the nightstand. Texts from squad mates, voicemails from numbers that start with networks, emails with subject lines shaped like traps. Hero or hazard? Unqualified saves hundreds. Who is she? By morning the panels had formed. Some host with perfect hair tilted his head and asked if veterans confuse combat with competence. Another said I'd stolen glory from real pilots. They spoke like they were sworn in on the holy book of hindsight. The footage of Leona's sneer ran in a loop under their voices. The Chiron called it family drama at 30,000 feet. The Air Force liaison showed up at 0900 with a paper folder in a world that thinks paper is quaint. Debrief in 16 minutes, Captain. FA, NTSB, our JAG on the line. He looked young and careful, like the uniform had fit him yesterday and he was still learning where the weight lived. In a conference room that reeked of coffee and impatience, they asked better versions of the same questions. I gave better versions of the same answers. When the FAA woman leaned into the camera and said, "Why not wait for ground instruction? Why assume command without airline clearance?" I said, "Because airline ops weren't on the plane. 300 people were." They didn't like it. They wrote it down anyway. Afterward, an airline attorney cornered me near the ice machine. "You've made us very nervous," he said. "Lawsuits nervous?" I asked. "Headlines nervous," he said. "There's footage of your sister's remarks. She's connected. We're hoping things can resolve quietly." "Quietly is for miracles," I said. This was work. Outside, cold air filleted the day clean. A little girl from row something waved with both hands. I waved back. And for 4 seconds my lungs remembered how to breathe without orders. By afternoon, the email hit like a bad parachute. Subject: Incident Inquiry, Unauthorized Assumption of Flight Controls, Civilian Aircraft. Every acronym that ever doubted a woman in a flight suit was CC'd. I clicked it open, read 3 lines, and closed it the way you close a door on a room that will still be there when you return. My lawyer civilian, mean in the right ways, met me in a lobby chair that swallowed lesser people. He let the viral clip of Leona play once on his laptop, then again with captions. "She's not even a real pilot. She's a toy soldier playing dress up." He paused on my sister's mouth-forming toy like it tasted expensive. "They'll try to bury you with this," he said. "Then we dig," I said. "Into what?" "Everything." The word felt like a checklist step and a war plan in one breath. Estate amendments, notaries, shell companies, email headers. The clause that cut me out didn't write itself. Someone supplied language. Someone accessed records they shouldn't have. He held my eyes, then nodded once like a judge striking wood. "We start with the trust." "Start with the trust," I repeated, and the coin in my pocket went warm again, as if old brass could approve a strategy. That night I sat on the bed and finally hit play on my voicemail. A reporter asked if I was a hero or a liability. A talk show offered makeup and car service. A stranger said his cousin owed me a beer bigger than his mortgage. Then a voice I hadn't expected. A woman, careful and tired, seat 28D. My 5-year-old slept through the worst part because you told us to breathe. If you need a statement, I'll give you the only one that matters. We walked off. I didn't save it. I didn't delete it either. I let it sit there like a runway light in fog. I set the phone down and looked at the envelope my father left me. The photo, the coin, the empty where a watch might have been. Discipline, the note had said. It had sounded small in a world of assets and signatures. It didn't sound small now. The next morning, my lawyer slid a thin stack across a table that smelled like lemon oil and old money. Preliminary polls, he said. And a curiosity, the notary on the mental health clause. He tapped the page with a pen. Her commission expired before the date stamped, and the digital certificate traces odd. Odd how? I asked. Like someone borrowed a signature they didn't own. I sat back, the hanger lights of yesterday still pulsing on the back of my eyes. In the hallway, a housekeeping cart rattled past like a tiny, loyal engine. Good, I said. Let's find the rest. Cliffhanger to episode 8. He slid one more printout across the table, IP metadata from a proxy firm tucked in the trust paperwork. The origin address resolved to The paper wasn't dramatic. No smoking gun, no blood-red signature. Just an IP address printed in 12-point font across the bottom margin of a metadata log. If you didn't know how to read it, you'd miss it. But I knew. My lawyer tapped it with his pen. This trace pings back to a Chicago office suite. Executive lease. Tenant of record, Hallberg Financial. Leona's firm. I leaned back in the chair, the lemon oil polish stinging my nose. So she didn't just influence the trust, she manufactured it. She orchestrated it, he corrected. Proxy firms, shell companies, forged notary stamps, and she left breadcrumbs because arrogance does what care never will. I almost laughed, but it came out like a breath through clenched teeth. For years I thought Leona's cruelty was just emotional, a sharp word here, a dismissive smirk there. But cruelty was her camouflage. Underneath, it was strategy. I palmed the coin in my pocket, pressing the eagle's worn beak into my skin. Dad hadn't left me land or stocks. He'd left me something sharper, a reminder that wars aren't fought in boardrooms or battlefields. They're fought in silence between breaths on trails only the discipline can follow. Get me copies, I said. Everything, triplicate, digital, hard, encrypted. I want her pinned 6 ways before Sunday. My lawyer raised an eyebrow. You planning a family reunion in court? I'm planning not to let her bury me alive. By the time I reached the temporary Air Force quarters near Gander, the news cycle had turned savage. One network called me heroine of the skies. Another labeled me unqualified soldier jeopardizes lives. The chyron at the bottom of one talk show read, pilot or pretender, the Ava Whitfield dilemma. I killed the volume. Headlines aren't cockpits, you can't fly them steady. Instead, I spread the documents across my desk. Trust amendments with language that read like daggers. Medical reports with sections highlighted, words twisted to paint me unstable. Emails routed through Carrick Trust Management, a ghost firm built out of shadows. The deeper I read, the more the pattern sharpened. She hadn't just erased me from the estate. She'd constructed a legal labyrinth where my existence was liability, where my name was shorthand for risk. It wasn't just theft. It was character assassination on letterhead. At 0200, my phone buzzed. A restricted number, I answered anyway. A man's voice clipped an official. Captain Whitfield, this is Special Investigator Grawn, Federal Inquiries. We received a packet this afternoon, your name's on the cover page. My lawyer's been busy, I said. Busy enough, he replied. There's substance here, we're opening review. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Review. The word sounded clinical, but I knew what it meant. The walls were closing in on Leona. Grawn cleared his throat. We'll need sworn statements. Chain of custody. We'll also need you prepared for pushback. Pushback's the only thing I've trained for, I said. The next morning, Leona called me herself, first time in months. Her number lit my screen like a flare in the dark. I let it ring twice before answering. You think you're clever, she said, voice cool as ice. Clever would have been covering your tracks, I replied. Her silence lasted 3 beats. Then you don't know what you've started. No, I said, staring at the stack of documents spread across my desk. I know exactly what I've finished. She hung up without another word. Later, sitting in the base cafeteria with a coffee that tasted like burnt paper, I replayed the landing in my head, not the panic, not the screams, just the moment of impossible quiet after wheels touched and before anyone spoke. That silence had weight, it had shape. People think revenge is fire and noise, but sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's watching the person who called you a toy soldier choke on the truth that you were the only one who kept her alive. By evening, my lawyer delivered the final packet, thick, heavy, the size of a brick. He slid it across the table with both hands. "This is everything," he said. "Fraudulent inheritance maneuvering, proxy firms tied to her office, forged notary, medical defamation, breach of fiduciary duty, the works." I rested my hand on the stack. Cold paper under warm skin. This wasn't just evidence. This was a weapon. "Tomorrow," I said, "we walk it into a federal office." He nodded, and then I looked at the coin in my other hand, my father's eagle, my father's silence. Then, I said, we see how loud silence can get. Cliffhanger to episode 9. The next morning, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I handed the file to Investigator Grahn. He flipped it open, scanned a page, and looked up at me. "We've been waiting for this," he said, "for the first time in months." The federal building didn't look like justice. It looked like concrete poured too fast, windows that never opened, and guards whose eyes scanned you like barcodes. I carried the brick of documents in both hands, heavier than its weight. Inside those pages was 20 years of my sister's lies stitched into contracts and signed in ink that wasn't hers. Investigator Grahn met me in a conference room that smelled of paper dust and recycled air. He was the kind of man who looked permanent. Close-cropped hair gone gray at the edges, tie knotted like he planned to be buried in it. He opened the folder, scanned a page, then another. No small talk, no hesitation. When he finally looked up, his eyes were sharp. "Captain Whitfield, we've been waiting for this." Waiting, the word landed like a verdict. It kept me for hours, walking through timelines. When did the clause appear? Who handled the filings? Which evaluations were leaked and how? I laid it out piece by piece, every detail like stepping stones across a river I refused to drown in. Grahn nodded slowly. "This isn't just inheritance fraud, this is coordinated. Forgery, defamation, corporate malfeasance. Your sister didn't just cut you out of the estate, she built a structure designed to bury you legally and reputationally." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm here." He leaned back. "We'll move. But understand, powerful people don't collapse quietly, they drag others down with them." I smiled, but it didn't touch my eyes. "Then I'll fly higher." 2 nights later I saw her, not in a courtroom, not in a boardroom at the base itself. She was waiting in the lobby, arms crossed, phone off for once. No entourage, just her. "You've made a mess," Leona said. I didn't slow my stride. "Cleaning up after you has been my life's work." She stepped in front of me, close enough that I caught the faint scent of her perfume, expensive and weaponized. "You think exposing me fixes anything? You think those men in suits will care about you once you're no longer a headline?" I looked her dead in the eye. "I didn't land that plane for headlines. I didn't bring these files for applause. I did it because responsibility doesn't ask permission." Her jaw tightened. "You humiliated me." "No," I said, calm as glass. "You did that yourself. I just stopped covering for it." For the first time, her mask cracked, not anger, not even fear, something smaller, recognition. She realized I wasn't playing her game anymore. That night, my lawyer called. "It's official. Federal inquiry launched. Press will know by morning." I sat in the dark barracks room staring at the coin on my palm. My father's eagle, smoothed by years, caught the faint glow of the desk lamp. Maybe he knew it would come to this. Maybe that's why he gave me metal instead of money. Because money ends. Metal endures. By morning, the headlines were different, not about me. About her, financial executive under federal review for fraudulent trust maneuvers. Leona Whitfield linked to forged estate filings. Family drama becomes corporate crisis. Her face on the screen wasn't smug. It was tight, defensive, framed by PR-crafted statements about misunderstandings and procedural oversights. She wasn't untouchable anymore. She was human, exposed. But exposure isn't victory. That afternoon, I got the summons. Not to testify yet, to explain myself. Again, the Department of Defense, the airline, the same questions, the same doubts. Why did I touch those controls? Why didn't I wait? Was I stable? Did I seek glory? I answered as I always had, directly, calmly, with no apologies. I didn't ask for permission, I saved lives. The room went quiet, they didn't clap, they didn't thank me, they just wrote it down. Back at the base, I found her waiting again. This time in the hall outside my office, dressed down but still sharp. Her eyes were rimmed red, not from tears but from exhaustion. "So this is what you wanted," she said, voice flat. "Revenge." I slung my duffel over my shoulder. "No, I wanted responsibility. You wanted control. There's a difference." She laughed once, bitter, hollow. "You'll never forgive me." I met her eyes one last time. "I don't need to. Forgiveness is for people who still care." I left her standing in a hallway lined with flags she'd never salute. That night, I opened my father's photo again, the one of him beside the F4. His grin, sun in his eyes, the kind of grin you give the sky when it hasn't beaten you yet. I set it on the desk beside the coin. The envelope was heavy on principle, light on mercy. Leona's resignation letter sat on top like a white flag stapled to a sword. Under it, the application, clean fonts, earnest lines, a neat signature. Morgan Whitfield, my niece. 18 on paper, older in the eyes. My lawyer watched me read. "Board forced it," he said. 11-minute emergency session. They prefer words like reputational event over fraud, but the result's the same. She's out. I set the resignation aside and kept my thumb on Morgan's name. "What about this?" He lifted a shoulder. "Cadet program, maybe a stunt, maybe a plea. Or maybe she wants her own sky," I said. He studied me for a beat. "You don't have to carry every Whitfield." "I'm not carrying her," I said. "I'm checking her wings." The government call hit at 0900 the next day. FA, NTSB, do D. A square of faces and rules on one screen. The Air Force liaison led, voice clean. "We're aligned on language." The FAA woman adjusted her glasses. "Our preliminary analysis concludes Captain Whitfield acted within reasonable emergency authority. No violation of aviation law occurred. It wasn't a parade, it was punctuation. The kind that ends a sentence you've been trapped inside." The airline lawyer unmuted. "On behalf of Skybridge, we appreciate the resolution." He paused like he wanted to say silence, then thought better of it. "We'll issue a statement." I didn't ask for their gratitude, I didn't ask for anything, I just let the weight slide an inch off my ribs. Post-call, the liaison stayed. "Command would like to know your preference, Captain." "My preference? Reassignment, you've earned one. Advisory track is open. Mentorship, safety doctrine, pilot development, you'd fly less. You'd build more." I looked past his shoulder to the window where the tarmac ran toward a flat line of winter trees. "Building sounds like oxygen," I said. "Let's do that." He nodded, not a salute, not a handshake, just the quiet recognition of two people who know work when they see it. The news cycle tilted again. Hero cleared, no charges. The panelists blinked into their cameras and offered canned contrition. Someone said nuanced situation. Another said the right outcome. No one apologized for inventing a villain the day before. I closed the tabs. Headlines are weather, loud and then gone. In my inbox, a real letter waited, a scanned page in shaky cursive, subject line, Seat 28D. "My youngest just turned 5. If you hadn't taken that yoke, we'd be a story that ends on a runway that doesn't exist. You didn't just land a plane, you saved a family." I didn't cry, I let the words fold themselves into a place behind my sternum and lie there, steady as a metronome. Leona called that night, no video, just a voice that sounded like it had been sanded down. "You won," she said. "This wasn't a game," I said. Silence. The kind that knows it's out of scripts. Then Morgan applied to your program. I saw, she didn't ask me. She shouldn't have to, I said. That's the point. "I won't help her," Leona said like a dare. "I won't hurt her," I said like a fact. She inhaled a thin, ragged thread of air. "Do you hate me?" I looked at the coin on my palm, at the eagle smoothed by years of other people's storms. "I don't carry you anymore," I said. "That's different." She hung up before I could hear her swallow. The advisory office was a rectangle of fluorescent light and bad carpet we made better with maps and coffee. I spent a week rethreading training modules, rewriting checklists in plain English, building a curriculum I wish someone had handed me at 22. "Courage is not speed," I wrote on the whiteboard the first morning. "It's decision over panic." Young pilots rotated through, all edges and eagerness. They listened like the sky was a person who might call them by name one day. I watched them run sims, stall, recover, correct. They were green, they were good, they were mine for as long as I could teach them to be their own. At night I drove the perimeter road until the tarmac gave way to scrub and sky. I parked, cracked the window, and let the cold air carve the noise out of my head. You don't own the sky, one of my instructors had told me years ago. You borrow it, earn the loan every time. He'd been right, and now with a desk badge that didn't smell like adrenaline, I could build a bank of loans for all the women coming next. Morgan showed up at the office door on a Tuesday. No entourage, no makeup, the same cheekbones as her mother, the eyes were someone else's, wary but clear. I didn't Good, I said, we don't sell those. She held out a folder, clean transcripts, solid letters, a 2-page statement without a single apology in it. I want to fly because gravity isn't always something that holds you down. Sometimes it's something you learn to work with. I read every line. When I looked up, she was standing at parade rest without knowing it, shoulders squared against a verdict. Orientation starts next month, I said. No shortcuts, no names. I don't want your name, she said. I want the work. You'll get it, I said, all of it. She nodded once, turned, and left with the barest tremor in her hands. I watched her go and felt something unknot in a place I hadn't known was tight. That evening, the Air Force liaison slid a final document across my desk. This came through JAG, he said. Estate matters are unblocked. Inside, language so clinical it squeaked, restoration of beneficiary standing, nullification of defective amendment, not vindication, foundation. Paper that used to erase me now put me back where blood and law had agreed I belonged. Congratulations, he said. Not why I did any of it, I answered. He managed a half smile. Do something good with it anyway. I intend to, I said. I drove out to the far edge of the field with the envelope on the passenger seat and my father's coin warming my palm. The runway lamps blinked in sequence, winking into dark like a code only pilots hear. I thought about revenge, how loud people expect it to be, how satisfying in their minds the moment when the enemy falls. That isn't what this was. This was simple math. Subtract what poisoned you, add what makes you useful. I put the car in park, tilted the seat back, and watched a trainer slice a clean line across a cold sky. Somewhere inside was a kid learning to keep her hands loose at rotation. Somewhere ahead was a runway that didn't care about her last name. The proposal had been a blueprint, a plan scrawled with arrows and margins full of what-ifs. But the commanders didn't see sketches. They saw a mission. Within weeks, the hangar was humming with more than turbines. It was humming with possibility. The Windflight Institute was no longer an idea scribbled on a napkin. It was a building with cadets in flight suits too big for their frames, engines coughing alive at sunrise, and laughter bouncing off hangar walls like jet wash. For the first time in months, I felt lighter. Not victorious. Not vindicated, just airborne. Then came the summons, a sealed envelope delivered by hand, Air Force seal pressed into the flap like a challenge coin. Inside, an invitation, Capitol Rotunda, joint session, award ceremony. The words didn't say it outright, but I knew what it meant. They weren't calling me to explain, they were calling me to stand. Leona's resignation had been a headline. The federal probe was a headline, but this was something different. The Medal of Honor doesn't get handed out for quiet paperwork or viral clips. It gets handed out because someone somewhere decided you did something the country needed to remember. When I told the cadets, they looked at me like I'd sprouted wings. One of them, Alvarez, a wiry kid from El Paso who'd stalled 3 times her first week, said, "Ma'am, are you nervous?" I thought about it. "No," I said. "I'm disciplined." They laughed, not at me but with me, the way people laugh when they believe you mean it. The Capitol smelled like marble and history. My boots clicked across floors polished by centuries of power. I wasn't in uniform this time. I wore dress blues, yes, but not for family, not for optics, for me. Ribbons lined my chest, brass caught the light, and the weight of fabric reminded me that silence has its own armor. The ceremony blurred until it didn't. Senators, generals, and a president whose handshake was firmer than the words he read. He spoke of courage, responsibility, and discipline in the face of impossible odds. My name echoed under the dome, amplified by microphones, engraved by cameras. When the medal was draped around my neck, it wasn't pride that hit me. It was gravity. The kind that says this isn't yours. You're borrowing it for everyone who never got the chance. I saluted, the cameras clicked, and then, like every mission, it was over. Afterward, I slipped outside, metal cold against my chest. The crowd thinned into limos and motorcades. On the steps, I found a single familiar face waiting. Morgan, my niece, no entourage, just her, jacket too thin for the March air. You looked different, she said. How so? Like you weren't carrying anyone else's weight anymore. I touched the metal. That's because I'm not. This isn't mine. It belongs to everyone who believed I couldn't. She nodded slowly. Then I want to earn mine. Not this, she gestured to the metal, but my own version. You will, I said. If you put in the work. Her eyes flashed, stubborn and certain. I will. For the first time, I believed her. Back at the institute, the cadets lined up on the tarmac when I returned. They saluted not the medal, not the ceremony, but me. I returned it sharp, then told them to get back to work. Flying isn't about applause, it's about practice. That night in my office, I set the medal on the desk beside my father's coin. Old brass and new ribbon. One earned in war, one earned in a sky that wasn't supposed to forgive me. I stared at them until the silence felt heavy enough to break. People think medals change you. They don't. Morgan's boots were too new, her helmet too shiny, her hands trembling just enough to give her youth away. But her eyes, those were steady. Instructor, she said, voice louder than she meant it. I'm ready for takeoff. I studied her not as my sister's daughter, not as an extension of anyone's legacy, just as a cadet standing on the edge of her own sky. Then we'll see if the sky agrees, I told her. The trainer coughed to life. Prop wash scattering grit across the tarmac. Morgan climbed in clumsy but determined. I watched from the tower, headset snug, clipboard balanced against my knee. Cadet Whitfield, confirm per-flight, I said into the mic. Her voice came back tight but clear. Per-flight complete, fuel checked, flaps tested, controls free and correct. She was ready on paper. Paper doesn't fly planes. Taxi, I ordered. The little bird rolled forward, wheels humming over concrete, tail wagging slightly from her overcorrection. Nerves, every pilot fights them on their first run. At the threshold she paused. I could almost hear her swallow. Cadet, I said, softer now, gravity's not your enemy, it's your teacher. Learn its lessons and it'll let you borrow the sky. Copy, she whispered. Then the throttle went forward. The engine roared. The trainer rattled, surged, lifted. For one wild second, the nose pitched too high. Wings wobbling. My hand clenched the mic, ready to call abort. But she eased off, corrected, leveled. The wheels left concrete. She was airborne. The tower fell silent around me except for her voice in my ear. Instructor, altitude 500 climbing. I closed my eyes for a moment, not to pray, to remember. The sound of engines at 30,000 feet over the Atlantic. The smell of wire burning. The weight of a yoke that didn't want to be held. The coin in my pocket telling me discipline wasn't a word, it was survival. Now it was inheritance. She circled twice, banked awkwardly the first time, smoother the second. When she landed, she flared too hard, bounced once but didn't lose it. The tires screeched, but the bird held straight. When she rolled to a stop, her laugh came through the headset, breathless, unguarded. Instructor, was that decent? I kept my voice flat. It didn't kill us, that's always a win. She laughed harder, real this time. When she climbed out, helmet under her arm, her grin nearly cracked her face. For the first time, she looked like herself, not her mother's daughter, not my burden, just Morgan. That night, I logged her flight in the journal. The 12th logbook on my shelf, 12 cycles of cadets who came believing they couldn't and left knowing they could. At the bottom of the page, I wrote what I'd never written before. Cadet shows restraint under critique. Confidence without arrogance. A Whitfield win, but not her mother's kind. I closed the book, slid it back into place, and sat for a long time in the quiet. People think revenge is loud. Courtrooms, headlines, arguments shouted until throats go raw. But the deepest revenge is silence, the kind that comes when you've outgrown the battlefield entirely. Leona's shadow no longer reached me. The estate was restored. The metal sat heavy but calm on my desk, and the institute was alive with young voices learning to borrow the sky. That was the ending, and the beginning. Weeks later, sunset painted the desert in colors so violent they felt holy, orange bleeding into violet, The horizon stretched like a wound that refused to close. I walked the runway alone, boots echoing against concrete still warm from the day. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the old patch from my first flight suit. Frayed, nearly torn in half, it smelled faintly of sweat and smoke. I didn't sew it on anything new. I placed it into a small box under the plaque. Wind Flight Institute. For every girl told she couldn't fly, you already know how to land, you were born to take off. The cadets were packing up gear when Morgan caught up to me. You think Mom will ever talk to me again? She asked, trying to sound casual, failing. I don't know, I said, but you'll be okay even if she doesn't. She nodded once, biting her lip. Thanks, instructor. I watched her jog back to her classmates, her laugh blending into theirs, the sound as pure as lift. Later in my office, I played the black box transcript from the flight one last time. Just ambient noise, alarms, and my own voice saying we're going to glide it in. Even now, I could hear the calm under the fear, not bravado, choice. I stopped the recording, looked out at the night sky. People had called me a hero, a fraud, a toy soldier, a sister, a savior. None of those names mattered. The only word that stuck was the one I wrote in the logbook with my own hand. Instructor. Because medals tarnish, headlines fade, estates collapse. But cadets keep flying, and every time one lifts off clean, I rise with them. If you've stayed with me through this whole story, thank you. Stories like these aren't about destruction, they're about freedom. About proving to yourself that you were never small, never broken, never just a toy soldier. So if this story hit you, do me a favor, hit subscribe, drop a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because every story we tell together builds another